The lumberjack entered a cave to warm himself, unaware an Apache widow was already living there. Winter came early that year, and it came without mercy. The mountains were already heavy with snow, and the wind moved through the tall trees like an angry breath. Far from towns and roads, a lone lumberjack worked in the forest, swinging his axe from sunrise to late afternoon. He was a large man, strong from years of hard labor, yet his face carried a quiet sadness that never seemed to leave him. He spoke little, even to himself, and when he did, his words were slow and careful, as if each one carried weight. He lived alone in a small wooden shelter built near the edge of the forest. It was simple, cold, and often silent, but silence was something he had learned to live with. Years ago, he had a family, a small home, laughter, warm meals, and plans for the future. All of that was gone now. A single mistake made during a difficult season of life had changed everything. He did not blame anyone else. He blamed himself, and that burden followed him everywhere. That morning, he had gone deeper into the mountains than usual to cut timber before the worst of winter blocked the paths. The sky had been clear when he left, pale blue and calm, but by afternoon the clouds gathered quickly. The wind turned sharp and snow began to fall without warning. At first, it was light, almost gentle, but within an hour the world became white and blurred. The lumberjack stopped working and looked around. The familiar trees now looked the same in every direction. Snow covered his tracks, and the cold pushed through his thick coat. He knew this mountain well, but even knowledge can fail when nature decides to change the rules. He tried to move downhill, hoping to reach a known path, but the wind fought him, and the cold made his fingers stiff. As daylight faded, fear slowly settled in. Not panic, but a deep understanding that the night could be dangerous. He had survived many winters, yet this one felt different. The storm grew stronger, and the sound of the wind echoed like a warning. He needed shelter, and soon. He walked carefully, using his axe as support, watching the ground for any sign of a safe place. That was when he noticed a dark shape in the side of a rocky hill. At first, he thought it was just a shadow, but as he moved closer, he saw the opening of a cave. It was not large, but it was deep enough to block the wind. He hesitated for a moment. Caves could be risky. Animals, falling rocks, or other dangers could be inside, but the cold left little room for choice. His breath came out in thick clouds and his legs felt heavy. He stepped inside. The cave was dry and quiet. The stone walls curved inward, protecting it from the wind. The air inside was cold but still, which felt like a gift compared to the storm outside. He placed his axe against the wall and removed his gloves, rubbing his hands together slowly. His fingers burned as feeling returned. Using flint and a small bundle of dry wood he carried, he carefully built a small fire near the entrance. The flames flickered and grew, sending warmth and light across the cave walls. Shadows danced on the stone, and for the first time in hours, he felt a small sense of safety. He sat down near the fire, pulling his coat tighter around himself. His body relaxed, but his mind did not. Long nights alone had trained his thoughts to wander backward. As the fire cracked softly, memories returned. A warm kitchen, a child's laughter, a woman's voice calling his name. He closed his eyes and breathed slowly, trying to push the memories away, but they stayed. Outside, the storm howled louder, as if the mountain itself was alive. Snow piled at the cave entrance, but the fire held strong. He added another piece of wood and stared into the flames. He wondered if this night would be like so many others, just him and his thoughts, waiting for morning. Then he felt it. Not a sound, not movement, but a presence. A feeling that he was not alone. His eyes opened and his body stiffened. He looked deeper into the cave, beyond the reach of the firelight. The shadows seemed thicker there, heavier. He held his breath and listened. The storm outside was loud, but inside the cave there was another kind of silence, the kind that feels watchful. He stood slowly, careful not to make sudden movements. His heart beat faster, but he stayed calm. Life had taught him that fear could be dangerous if it controlled him. He took a step forward, then another, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. That was when he saw signs that this place was not empty. Near the back of the cave, partially hidden behind rocks, were objects placed with care. A small bundle wrapped in cloth, tools made from stone and bone, a carefully stacked pile of dry grass used for sleeping. These were not left by animals. Someone had made a life here, however small and hidden. The lumberjack froze. His first instinct was to leave. This cave belonged to someone else, and stepping into another person's shelter without permission was dangerous. But the storm outside was still strong and night had fully fallen. He stepped back toward the fire, his mind racing. Whoever lived here could return at any moment. They could be afraid, angry, or worse. He thought about putting out the fire and leaving, but the cold pressed in, reminding him how weak he already felt. He raised his hands slightly, palms open, as if someone could see him in the darkness. He spoke softly, his voice rough from cold and age. "I mean no harm," he said slowly. "I came in from the storm." His words echoed quietly against the stone. There was no answer. Minutes passed, heavy and slow. The fire crackled. The wind screamed outside. The cave remained silent. He lowered his hands but stayed alert. He moved closer to the fire and sat again, keeping his body turned toward the back of the cave. He did not touch any of the items he had seen. Respect mattered, even when survival was at stake. As he waited, he noticed how carefully the cave had been arranged. The sleeping area was kept dry. The tools were placed within reach. Someone here understood hardship and planning. This was not a temporary shelter. It was a home. He wondered who the person might be, a traveler, a hunter. Someone hiding from the world just as he was in his own way. The thought made him feel uneasy, yet also strangely connected. The fire warmed his face, but his back felt cold, as if unseen eyes were watching him. He told himself it was only his imagination, shaped by loneliness and fear. Still, he could not fully relax. Time stretched. His body grew tired and his eyelids felt heavy, but sleep would not come easily. Too many questions filled his mind. Too many unknowns. Outside, the storm slowly began to weaken. The wind lost some of its anger and the snowfall softened. Inside the cave, the fire burned low, casting gentle light across the stone. The lumberjack sat quietly, breathing slow and steady, waiting for whatever the night would bring. He did not know that this single decision, to step into this cave, would change his life in ways he could never have imagined. For now, all he knew was the cold, the silence, and the feeling that two broken lives had crossed paths, even before a single word had been exchanged. The fire had burned low when a soft sound broke the silence. It was not loud enough to be heard clearly, but it was different from the wind and different from the crack of the fire. The lumberjack's body tightened at once. His tiredness vanished, replaced by sharp attention. He did not move, only listened. The sound came again, deeper inside the cave. A slow movement, careful and controlled. Someone was there. He stood up slowly, making sure his movements were visible. His hands were empty and he kept them away from his axe. His heart beat hard in his chest, but his face stayed calm. Fear would not help now. From the darkness, a figure stepped forward into the edge of the firelight. It was a woman. She was thin but strong, her posture straight despite the caution in her movements. Her dark hair was tied back, and her eyes watched him closely, sharp and alert like someone who had learned to survive without help. In her hand, she held a simple knife, not raised to attack but ready. The lumberjack froze, not out of fear alone but out of respect. He could see at once that this woman had lived through more than the cold. Her face carried grief, strength, and deep watchfulness. She was not surprised to see him, only tense. They stood facing each other, the firelight flickering between them. Neither spoke. The wind outside filled the silence, pushing snow against the cave walls. The lumberjack slowly lifted his hands again, palms open. His voice was low and steady. "I didn't know anyone was here," he said. "The storm forced me inside. I won't stay if you don't want me to." The woman did not answer. Her eyes moved from his face to his hands, then to the axe resting against the wall. She measured distance, weight, intention. He could see it clearly. This was someone who trusted action more than words. She spoke at last, her voice quiet and firm. The words were few, shaped by a language different from his own, but her meaning was clear enough. This was her shelter, her place. He nodded slowly. "I understand," he replied, though he knew she might not fully understand his words. He pointed toward the cave entrance where snow still fell lightly. "Storm," he said, then touched his chest. "Cold." She followed his gesture, then looked back at him. For a long moment she said nothing. Her grip on the knife loosened slightly, but she did not lower it. The fire crackled between them. Time passed, stretched thin by uncertainty. Finally, she made a small motion with her hand, not welcoming but not refusing either. She stepped back toward the deeper part of the cave, keeping her eyes on him. The message was clear. He could stay for now, but only under watch. Relief passed through him, though he did not show it. He nodded again and sat back down near the fire, keeping his movements slow and clear. He turned his body slightly away from her, showing that he did not mean to threaten her space. The woman moved quietly around the cave, staying in the shadows. She placed her knife on a nearby stone, close enough to reach if needed. Then she sat on the ground, her back against the wall, far from him but close enough to observe. They shared the cave in silence. Minutes turned into hours. The storm outside weakened further, but the cold remained strong. The fire needed more wood, and the lumberjack hesitated. He did not want to take from her supplies without permission. He looked toward her, then at the pile of wood near the wall. He pointed to the fire, then to the wood, raising his eyebrows slightly in question. She watched him carefully, then nodded once. He added a small piece of wood to the fire, careful not to use more than needed. The flames grew stronger, sending warmth through the cave. The woman's shoulders relaxed just a little, though her eyes never left him. As the warmth spread, the tension slowly softened. Not trust, but balance. The lumberjack reached into his pack and pulled out a piece of dried food. He broke it in half and held one piece out, resting it on a flat stone between them. He did not push it toward her, only placed it there and withdrew his hand. She did not move at first. She watched the food, then his face. Hunger fought with caution. After a long pause, she leaned forward, took the food, and nodded once more. It was a small gesture, but it carried meaning. They ate in silence, listening to the wind fade outside. The firelight revealed more details now. The woman wore worn clothing repaired many times. A small bundle near her side held personal items carefully wrapped. Around her neck hung a simple object, smooth from touch, clearly important to her. The lumberjack wondered about her story but did not ask. Words could wait. As the night deepened, exhaustion returned. The woman shifted slightly, adjusting the dry grass beneath her. The lumberjack leaned back against the cave wall, keeping distance. Sleep came slowly, broken and light. At some point, he woke to find the fire still burning and the woman still awake. She sat quietly, staring into the flames, her expression distant. Grief rested on her face like a shadow that never fully left. He understood that look. He had worn it himself for years. Carefully, he spoke again, his voice low. "You're alone," he said, more as an observation than a question. She glanced at him, then nodded once. He hesitated, then touched his chest. "So am I." She studied him for a long moment. Something in her gaze changed, softened just slightly. She looked back at the fire, then at the object around her neck. Her hand closed around it briefly. She spoke quietly, her words slow. Though he did not understand them fully, he understood the pain behind them. Loss, a life taken, a world changed. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, silence returned, but it was different now. Heavier yet shared. He did not speak of his own past, not yet. Some wounds needed time before they could be opened. The night passed slowly. The storm ended, leaving the world outside quiet and buried in white. Morning light slowly crept into the cave, soft and pale. When dawn arrived, they both felt it. A shift. The danger of the night had passed, but new choices waited. The woman stood first, stretching stiff muscles. She looked toward the entrance, then back at him. The knife remained close, but her posture was less guarded. The lumberjack stood as well, gathering his things. He did not want to overstay his welcome. He pointed outside, then to himself, as if to say he would leave. She watched him, then surprised him by shaking her head slightly. She gestured toward the fire, then outside, then back inside the cave. The meaning was simple. The cold was still dangerous. Leaving too soon would be foolish. He nodded, understanding. He set his pack down again. They sat once more, two strangers bound by a shared night and shared silence. Neither knew what would come next. Trust was still fragile like thin ice, but something had changed. Fear no longer filled the space between them. Only caution, respect, and the quiet beginning of understanding. Morning light slowly filled the cave, soft and pale, touching the stone walls and the quiet faces of the two people inside. The storm was gone, but the cold still held the mountains tightly. Outside, the world looked clean and silent, covered in white. Inside the cave, the air felt different now, less tense, less sharp. The woman was the first to move. She carefully added a small piece of wood to the fire, keeping it alive without making it large. She worked with calm control, every movement practiced and careful. The lumberjack watched quietly. He did not offer to help right away. He had learned that respect sometimes meant waiting. After a moment, he stood and pointed toward the cave entrance, then toward a nearby tree visible outside. He mimed cutting wood, then looked at her, asking without words. She studied him, then nodded once. He stepped outside into the cold morning air. Snow crunched under his boots as he gathered fallen branches close to the cave. He worked quickly but calmly, aware that someone depended on his care now, even if no words had been spoken. When he returned, he placed the wood neatly near the wall, separate from her supplies. The woman watched this closely. He noticed it. Small actions mattered here. They shared the warmth of the fire again, sitting apart but no longer strangers. Hunger came quietly, not sharp but steady. The lumberjack reached into his pack and pulled out the last of his dried food. He hesitated. It was all he had left. Still, he split it and placed a piece between them. The woman did not take it right away. Instead, she reached for her own small pouch and pulled out dried roots and berries. She placed them beside his offering, then gently pushed both toward the center. It was not charity. It was balance. They ate slowly, chewing carefully, saving energy. The food was simple, but shared food carried meaning stronger than taste. The fire crackled softly, and for the first time, silence did not feel heavy. After eating, the woman rose and moved deeper into the cave. She returned with a folded piece of cloth and handed it to him. Inside was a simple bandage made from clean fabric. He looked at it, confused for a moment, then realized she had noticed the cut on his hand from the axe. It was small but red and sore. He had ignored it. "Thank you," he said softly, though he did not know if she understood the word. She nodded slightly. He cleaned the cut and wrapped it carefully. The simple act made him feel something he had not felt in a long time, being noticed. Time passed slowly. The sun climbed higher, though its warmth did not reach the cave. Outside, the snow sparkled in the light. Inside, two lives continued, side by side. The woman began to sort her belongings. She checked her tools, repaired a loose strap, and adjusted her sleeping area. Everything she did had purpose. The lumberjack recognized that way of living. He had lived like that himself for many years. At one point, she sat near the entrance and looked out, scanning the land carefully. Her body grew tense. The lumberjack followed her gaze. In the distance, faint shapes moved between the trees. Human figures. His body tightened. He knew the signs. Other men traveled these mountains and not all were kind. Some took what they wanted, some brought trouble without looking for it. The woman's jaw set, and her hand moved close to her knife. He raised a calming hand, then slowly moved toward the back of the cave. He pointed to a narrow space hidden behind rocks, a place hard to see from outside. Then he pointed to himself and shook his head, meaning he would stay visible. She looked at him sharply, questioning. He tapped his chest. "I'll stay," he said quietly. "You hide." She hesitated. Trust was still thin, but danger made choices fast. She moved silently to the hidden space, pulling her belongings with her. In seconds, she was gone from sight. The lumberjack sat near the fire, calm but alert. He adjusted the flames lower, making less smoke. His axe rested nearby, but he did not hold it. The figures outside came closer. Voices carried faintly through the trees. He could not hear the words clearly, but the tone was rough. Searching. One man stepped into view near the cave entrance. He paused, looking inside. His eyes fell on the lumberjack. "Well," the man said, his voice careless, "didn't expect to find anyone up here." The lumberjack stood slowly. "Storm caught me," he replied evenly, "just waiting for the cold to ease." The man's eyes moved around the cave. He noticed the fire, the supplies. His gaze lingered, searching. "You alone?" the man asked. The lumberjack met his eyes without fear. "Yes." The man hesitated, then stepped closer. The lumberjack did not move. His heart beat hard, but his face stayed calm. Years of survival had taught him how to stand his ground without challenge. Another voice called from outside. "Anything there?" "Just a woodcutter," the first man replied after a moment. He looked back at the lumberjack, his interest fading. "You're a long way from town." "Work takes me where it takes me," the lumberjack said. The man shrugged. "Be careful. Mountains don't forgive mistakes." With that, he stepped away. The figures moved off, their voices fading into the trees. The lumberjack waited long after they were gone. Only when the forest returned to silence did he relax his shoulders. He turned toward the hidden space and nodded. The woman emerged slowly, her eyes sharp, scanning every corner. When she was sure the danger had passed, she looked at him. Her gaze held something new now. Trust. Not complete, not blind, but real. She spoke quietly, her words soft but steady. He did not understand all of them, but he understood the meaning. Gratitude, recognition. He nodded. "You're safe," he said simply. She studied him for a long moment, then sat near the fire again, closer than before. The space between them felt smaller now, less empty. As the day moved on, they shared small tasks. He repaired part of the cave entrance to block wind. She prepared herbs and roots, laying them out to dry. They worked without words, moving around each other naturally. At one point, she showed him a mark carved into the stone near the back of the cave. It was simple but meaningful, a memory, a life once shared. Her face grew distant as she touched it. He did not ask. He did not need to. Later, as the light outside began to fade again, she surprised him by speaking more. Slowly, with pauses, she shared pieces of her past, a partner lost, a home gone. The cave becoming shelter when the world grew unsafe. He listened, saying nothing, giving her the space to speak. When she finished, silence returned. Then quietly he spoke of his own loss. Not details, just enough. A family, a mistake, years of regret. She listened now, her eyes steady and understanding. Two stories met in the quiet of the cave. Different paths, same pain. Night came again, but this time it did not feel threatening. The fire burned gently. The cave felt warmer, not just from flame, but from shared presence. They lay down to rest, still separate, still careful, but no longer alone. Outside, the mountain stood silent under the stars. Inside, two broken lives rested, held together by trust slowly forming, one careful moment at a time. The next morning arrived quietly. No storm, no harsh wind, only the soft sound of snow melting far away and the slow breathing of the mountains. The fire had burned low during the night, leaving a gentle warmth in the cave. Pale light slipped in through the entrance, touching the stone floor and waking both of them slowly. The woman rose first, as she often did. She moved with care, listening before doing anything else. Satisfied that the forest was calm, she added a small piece of wood to the fire. The lumberjack opened his eyes and watched the flames grow. For the first time in many years, he woke without the heavy weight of loneliness pressing on his chest. They greeted the morning with a shared look and a small nod. No words were needed. Their understanding had grown beyond speech. The cold still ruled the land, but the air felt lighter. The lumberjack stood and stretched his stiff muscles. He pointed toward the trees outside, then at his axe, then back to her. His meaning was clear. He needed to return to his work soon, but not yet. She studied him carefully, then nodded. She stepped outside with him, her movements quiet and alert. The forest stood tall and silent, its white cover shining softly under the rising sun. She showed him tracks in the snow, signs of animals moving safely away from the area. The mountains were calm for now. They returned to the cave and shared what little food remained. Each bite was taken slowly, thoughtfully. Supplies were low, and both knew it. The woman then moved to a corner of the cave and brought out a small bundle. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing dried plants, roots, and leaves. She showed him which ones were safe to use, pointing, breaking small pieces, and explaining in simple sounds and gestures. He listened closely, memorizing everything. This knowledge was not offered lightly. It was trust. Later, they stepped outside again. Together, they searched nearby areas for more supplies. The lumberjack cut small branches and gathered fallen wood. The woman found hidden plants beneath the snow, brushing it away carefully. They worked side by side, not too close, not too far, moving with shared purpose. As they worked, the lumberjack noticed something he had not seen before. The woman's strength was not loud or forceful. It was steady, patient, and deeply rooted. Every movement showed experience earned through hardship. He respected that. At one point, they heard voices again in the distance. Both froze. The woman's body went still, her eyes sharp. She moved toward the rocks instinctively. The lumberjack gently placed a hand up, signaling calm. He listened carefully. The voices were faint, carried by the wind. They sounded closer than before. The lumberjack knew the risk now was greater. If those men returned and discovered the woman, her safety would be threatened. His mind worked quickly. He stepped closer to her and spoke softly. "If they come," he said slowly, pointing toward himself, "I lead them away." She stared at him, shaking her head slightly. She did not like the idea. He met her gaze firmly but calmly. He pointed to the forest, then walked a few steps away from the cave, showing her the direction he would take. He pointed back to the cave and then to her, meaning she should stay hidden. She hesitated. The idea of trusting anyone with her safety was new and dangerous, but she could see he was serious. This was not fear pushing him, it was choice. Finally, she nodded once. They returned to the cave quickly. The woman gathered her important items and moved into the hidden space again. The lumberjack adjusted the fire to make it look like a simple resting place. Then he stepped outside, leaving clear tracks in the snow heading away from the cave. He walked steadily, not rushing, making sure the tracks were easy to follow. His heart beat hard, but his steps were firm. He had lived with regret for many years. Protecting someone else, even for a moment, felt like a chance to do something right. The voices grew louder behind him. He did not look back. After a long while, he heard them clearly. One of the men called out to him. "Hey, you there!" He stopped and turned slowly. "Morning," he said calmly. "What are you doing out here alone?" the man asked, narrowing his eyes. "Cutting wood," the lumberjack replied. "Storm delayed me." The men looked at his axe and nodded slightly. One of them glanced back toward the direction of the cave. "You see anyone else around?" another man asked. The lumberjack shook his head. "Just me." "Forest is empty this time of year." The men exchanged looks. They were not convinced, but they were cold and tired. After a moment, one of them shrugged. "Be careful," he said. "This place isn't kind." They turned away, moving deeper into the forest, following a different path. The lumberjack waited until their voices faded completely. Only then did he turn back toward the cave, walking carefully, erasing some of his tracks as he went. When he returned, the woman was already watching from the shadows. She stepped out slowly, relief clear in her eyes. She spoke softly, her voice full of emotion. He did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. "You're safe," he said again, his voice gentle. She nodded, then surprised him by placing her hand briefly over her heart and then gesturing toward him. It was a simple gesture, but it carried deep gratitude. As the day passed, something changed between them. The careful distance they had kept began to fade. They sat closer to the fire. Their movements became more relaxed. Silence felt comfortable, not tense. That evening, the woman shared more of her story. Slowly, carefully, she spoke of her life before the cave, of love once known, of loss that came without warning, of learning to survive alone when the world became unsafe. The lumberjack listened, his eyes fixed on the fire. He understood pain that stayed long after the moment passed. When she finished, he shared more of his own story too, how he had worked too much, how he had missed signs, how regret followed him like a shadow. His voice was quiet but honest. She listened without judgment. When he finished, she nodded slowly. The fire burned low as night returned. The cold pressed in again, but neither felt afraid. They added wood together, careful and thoughtful. When it came time to rest, they lay down on opposite sides of the cave, but closer than before. The space between them felt shared, not empty. As the lumberjack drifted toward sleep, he realized something important. This cave had not just protected him from the cold. It had opened a door he thought was closed forever. Hope, not loud or sudden. Just quiet and steady, like the fire beside them. Outside, the stars shone over the mountains. Inside, two lives rested, no longer moving in opposite directions, but slowly, carefully, finding a shared path forward. Morning came gently, as if the mountains themselves wished to let the day arrive without disturbance. Soft light touched the cave walls, and the quiet felt peaceful rather than empty. The fire had burned down to warm embers, still giving enough heat to chase away the sharp edge of the cold. Outside, the snow glittered under a clear sky. The lumberjack woke slowly. For a moment, he did not remember where he was. Then he saw the stone walls, the small fire, and the woman sitting near the entrance, watching the morning. The memory of the past days returned to him, and with it came a strange calm. He felt rested in a way he had not felt in years. The woman turned her head slightly and noticed he was awake. She gave a small nod. It was not a greeting, but it carried kindness. He returned the nod and sat up carefully, not wanting to disturb the quiet they shared. They both knew this day would be different. The storm was long gone. The path back to his work and eventually to town would soon be open. Nothing was forcing him to stay anymore. He stood and gathered his belongings slowly. Each movement felt heavier than it should have. The woman watched him, understanding clear in her eyes. She did not stop him. She did not rush him either. They shared the last of their food, dividing it evenly without discussion. Afterward, the woman packed her herbs and tools, placing them back where they belonged. Life would continue for both of them, though in different directions. The lumberjack stepped outside the cave and took a deep breath. The cold air filled his lungs, clean and sharp. He looked at the forest, the tall trees standing strong and silent. This land had taken much from many people, but it had also taught him something important. The woman joined him at the entrance. For a moment, they stood side by side, looking out at the mountains. No words passed between them, but many thoughts did. He turned to her and spoke gently. "I'll be heading back," he said, pointing toward the trees. "My work is waiting." She listened, then nodded. Her face was calm, but there was sadness there too. She pointed toward the cave, then toward the land around it. This place was still her shelter, her choice. He respected that. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small item. It was simple, worn from years of use but still strong. A small metal tool he used often in his work. He held it out to her, resting it on his open palm. She looked at it, then at him. At first she shook her head. He gently pushed it a little closer, then tapped his chest and shook his head, showing he no longer needed it as much as she might. After a pause, she accepted it. She did not smile, but her eyes softened. She reached for her neck and removed the smooth object she always wore. She held it for a moment, then placed it carefully in his hand. He hesitated. "I can't," he began. She closed his fingers around it and nodded firmly. They stood there holding each other's gifts, feeling the weight of what had been shared. These were not objects of great value, but they carried meaning far deeper than tools or tokens. The lumberjack took a step back, then another. He stopped and looked at her once more. "Thank you," he said quietly. The words felt too small, but they were all he had. She touched her heart again, then gestured toward him and the path ahead. "Go safely." He turned and began to walk away. Each step felt harder than the last. He did not look back right away. He knew that if he did, he might not leave at all. When he finally reached the edge of the trees, he stopped and turned. She was still there, standing at the cave entrance, watching him go. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the snow-covered ground. Then she raised her hand slightly. He raised his in return, and then he walked on. The journey back through the forest was long but steady. The lumberjack followed familiar paths, his body moving on memory alone. His mind, however, was full. He thought about the cave, the fire, the quiet understanding. He thought about how close he had come to giving up during the storm, and how close he had come to losing himself over the years. Something inside him had shifted. When he reached his small shelter near the edge of the forest, it looked the same as always. Cold, simple, empty. But he did not feel the same as before. He set down his pack and sat quietly for a long time, holding the smooth object the woman had given him. From that day on, he worked differently. He still cut timber and lived simply, but he no longer buried himself in silence. When he passed travelers, he greeted them. When he reached town, he spoke more, listened more. Slowly, he became part of the world again. The memory of the cave stayed with him. On cold nights, he would think of the firelight and the quiet strength of the woman who had survived so much. He never forgot her. High in the mountains, the woman continued her life as well. She used the tool he had given her to make her days easier. She gathered food, repaired her shelter, and watched the land carefully. The cave remained her home, but she was not the same woman who had once hidden from everyone. She trusted the world just a little more now. Sometimes, when she stood at the cave entrance and looked out over the forest, she thought of the man who had walked into her life during a storm. She remembered his calm voice, his steady presence, and his choice to protect rather than turn away. They never met again. But they did not need to. Both carried something forward from those shared days. Not a promise, not a future together, but something just as important. A reminder that kindness could exist even in the hardest places. That understanding could grow between strangers. That broken lives could still find moments of meaning. Years later, when the lumberjack grew older and his strength faded, he would still speak of the mountains with respect. And when the woman eventually chose to leave the cave and move on, she did so without fear. Their paths crossed only once in a single winter storm. Yet that moment was enough to change how they saw the world, enough to remind them that even in silence, even in loss, hope could still be found, quietly, patiently, waiting to be seen.